YouTube, Lokaya Nama. Thank you for joining me for a special astrology Q&A. So what we did was put up a comment in the communities tab of my channel page and let all of you comment on that with questions that you would want to see addressed here. And then let you do the thumbs up buttons on those comments to choose which ones were the most popular or the most important, the questions that you really wanted to see addressed. So I went through and collected all of them, and we'll answer them today in order. I just will mention that except for one or two of you who are really good at expressing yourselves in written English, I've edited the questions, mostly just to make them have grammatical and structural sense, propriety, but sometimes just because some parts were redundant, like sometimes people's later questions are answered by the earlier questions being answered, so I could edit out the later ones, etc., etc. So some of them are edited. You'll notice that. I am sure. So let's begin. So what we're going to do is we did have one question about sidereal versus tropical, and we will handle that first. And then after that, it won't come up again. So if you're impatient with that one, just hold your breath for a couple of seconds. We'll get this covered. So here's the first question. This is from D. D asks, please reply to this statement by a well-known sidereal Vedic astrologer. Quote, Surya Siddhanta is completely based on the sidereal zodiac Narayan chakra. The tropical zodiac is only used for specific purposes, i.e. to determine the season. I mean, I don't want to... I've already edited down the statement even to be only the relevant stuff. But obviously you can see if he's using the words completely, then what is the second sentence about it all? Surya Siddhanta is completely based on the sidereal zodiac, but then how does it mention a tropical zodiac even if it's just for the season? So obviously completely doesn't mean completely. And that's kind of important because Surya Siddhanta does indeed involve sidereal calculations and things. But it's not completely, and the part that's not completely sidereal is the zodiac part. So let me address this in two parts. First, and it's not going to take long. First, let me just explain what the Surya Siddhanta does have in it, and the second is reply to this thing about the tropical zodiac specific purposes. Okay? So chapter 1 of the Surya Siddhanta, which you can find actually translated on my page, chapter 1 says that we should measure the orbits and the location in an orbit of any planet in reference to a star, Revati. And it tells you how to do that. So chapter 1 does establish that planetary longitudes are calculated sidereally. Chapter 8 establishes that nakshatra borders, where the nakshatras are, is also calculated in reference to stars. So in chapter 1 we hear that planetary positions, that the Surya Siddhanta will calculate planetary positions sidereally. And the nakshatra positions are calculated sidereally, and then in chapter 14 we hear, with equal clarity, that the zodiacs are calculated tropically. So there's three calculations here: planets, nakshatras, and rashis. Planets are done by a star, sidereal. Nakshatras are done by stars, sidereal. The zodiac is done by solstices and equinoxes, tropical. And so how do you translate between the two sets? That's what Ayanamsha is for. That's what's really in the Surya Siddhanta. So The word completely has to be taken out of this person's statement. Surya Siddhanta is somewhat based on sidereal zodiac. Sidereal, not even zodiac. The Surya Siddhanta is somewhat based on sidereal things. But the zodiac is tropical in the Surya Siddhanta. Here he claims that it is only used to determine the seasons. This is not reasonable. The Surya Siddhanta doesn't say so. In fact, the Surya Siddhanta says there is no difference between the calendar and the months and the seasons and the zodiac. So that contradicts him. So that wasn't too painful, was it? That is all that we will talk about in terms of sidereal stuff. Now we will move on to other topics. The next question is from Gift Word, and it's about special aspects. This one, by the way, had 7 thumbs up. So there were 2 questions that were asked very late in the cycle, like yesterday, but still got some thumbs up. So I figured that those were actually quite popular too. So I did include those 2. I'll mention them when we get to them. But this one was a 7-vote question from Gift Word. What do the special aspects of malefic planets signify? For example, Mars has a 4th and an 8th house aspect. So what does the 4th aspect mean and what does the 8th aspect mean? So please look at my YouTube channel for the videos about aspects and learn about aspects. It is not the malefic planets that have special aspects. It's the outer planets that have special aspects. What is an aspect in the first place? An aspect, this word in English, the meaning is very old, so we kind of have forgotten the context, but it means that an angle of seeing something. And in Sanskrit it's called drishti, which means the way that you look at something. So aspects are about the way that one thing can see something else. So it's about exerting your influence by putting your eye on something. The outer planets have a better view because of their remote position. The inner planets have a more limited view. So Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, which are the outer planets, get what we call special or additional aspects. Every planet has an aspect to right across the sky from it. It can see right in front of it 180 degrees. But those outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, they have extra places where they can see. Now that is a short version of the story. The more detailed version of the story is that every planet can see very clearly right in front of it, but also pretty strongly to the right side and just a little bit to the left of the front. So every planet can see pretty well to 4 and 8, but really clear to 7. And then half so clear to the trines, and then a quarter clear to the very far sides. That's the actual pattern. The outer planets improve on various ones of those. Mars improves on 4 and 8. So instead of seeing it just kind of clear, it sees it super clear, 4, 8, and 7. Jupiter improves on the trines. Instead of seeing it halfway clear, it sees it fully clear. And Saturn improves on the very far edges. So you see the further out you go, the more wide the vision becomes. So this is why certain planets, the outer planets, have these improved influences. And the second part of this question is, as if the special aspects signify something. Like, what does the 4th house aspect of Mars mean? What does the 8th house aspect of Mars mean? This is not a Vedic idea. Vedic aspects are not by type. Persian aspects are by type. Persian aspects have divorced the vision pattern from the planet and made it universal. They say that every planet has the same type of vision. Doesn't matter if you're outer or inner. That's how the Persians looked at the aspects. And they said that but the squares are like Saturn's and Mars, so they're malefic, and the trines are like Jupiter's, so they're benefic. This is the Persian idea that square aspects are different than trine aspects, different than an opposition aspect. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just telling you that it's not a Vedic astrology idea. It's recorded in India. It's recorded and ascribed to the Persians. The Indian concept of an aspect, which I bet you is the original classical global concept because India preserves all these things. That's its forte. The Indian concept is a planet is a planet, and the way that you look at something, there's not power in the look, there's power in the person looking. If I put my eye on you, then you're influenced by me. If somebody else puts their eye on you, then you're influenced by them. It doesn't matter what angle we look at you from. So, the fourth aspect of Mars, the eighth aspect of Mars, it doesn't make a difference. It's how strong is Mars aspecting something else or not. The influence will always be from Mars. If Mars is in Capricorn, it will be a certain type of an aspect. If Mars is in Cancer, it'll be another kind of an aspect. If Mars is in the sixth house, it'll be a certain kind of aspect. It's the energy of the planet is extending itself through its vision. That's how the Vedic aspects work. I'm sure there's people they're telling you otherwise, but I'm just telling you that the high fidelity version of Vedic astrology. All right. Now we move on to the 8 thumbs up questions. This is a similar one. This is about aspect strength from Blinky 746. Blinky, how's Pac-Man doing? Okay, I just wondered because I am a Pac-Man fan, and Blinky is one of the ghost names. Blinky asks, how strong Blinky, I just got your email, thank you. How strong do mutual aspects have to be in order to make a rajayoga? If they are not strong enough to form the yoga, what role do they play in the interpretation of the chart? So basically the answer is, how strong do they have to be? They should be 75%. That's my rule of thumb. So in other words, if the question is how strong should an aspect be before it's considered important, my answer is 75%, just for the sake of giving you an answer. And then if it's a mutual aspect, that means that the average of the two aspects have to be 75%. So for example, if Saturn is aspecting the moon 100% and the moon is aspecting Saturn 0%, then the mutual aspect between them is 50. It's not strong. But if Saturn is aspecting the moon 80% and the moon is aspecting Saturn 90%, then the mutual aspect between them is 85. And that is a strong mutual aspect. So I just give 75, like I said, as for the sake of having a number. It's not literally that 75 is the number. Really, it's more like 3/4. It's sort of like a ratio, 3/4 of the full. So what you should keep an eye out for is sometimes in charts, there's a lot of aspects happening. And sometimes in charts, there's very few aspects happening. In charts where there's a lot of aspects happening, then you need 75 or higher for any particular aspect to be dominant in that chart and be important in that chart. But in charts where there's almost no aspects happening, or there's no aspects happening, then any aspect is the most important aspect in that chart. So if you're ready to deal with more sophisticated math, then take it as 75% of the maximum aspect in that particular chart should be considered to be a strong aspect in that chart. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, what if an aspect isn't strong enough to be considered a strong aspect? Actually, there's like kind of another part to this question too, is what makes an mutual aspect into a rajayoga. This person asking the question obviously knows that, but you guys hearing the question might not know that. If the two planets involved in the aspects are lords of central and trinal houses. So, for example, if one of them is the lord of the 4th house and another one is the lord of the 5th house, and then they mutually aspect each other, that's a rajayoga. Now, the second part of the question was, if they're not strong enough, then what do? Do you just write them off and forget about them? No, it's simple. If they're weak, then the effect is weak. And however weak they are, that's how weak the effect is. So do you want to spend your time interpreting things that are weak? You probably shouldn't. You should focus on the things that are strong, because that will become the more overriding aspect of your condition or the person's condition. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, please maybe rewind the tape or something and listen to it a few times. And if it still doesn't make sense, there will be another QA in the future you can ask again. Sorry. Or you can send me an email. All right. Thank you, Blinky. Now let's move on to the next question. This one with 9 thumbs up. Oh, I went to the wrong spot. I knew this would happen. Give me a minute. This is from Tatev Agajanyan. Tatev asks, our ultimate spiritual life purpose seems transcendental to astrological circumstances. Do we also have a secondary purpose for this lifetime? If so, where can we see it in our birth chart? So this question was actually asked several times by several people. And although this particular one only has 9 thumbs up, there's actually a whole lot of interest in this question. And there's 3 other people that asked it, and we'll encounter it again 3 other times. But this is the first time that we're looking at this question of spirituality or life purpose. So what she's saying is, I think that our spiritual purpose is not affected by astrology. So then, what is astrology for? Do we have a secondary purpose? And then where would you see that? So my answer to this question, again, doing it in 2 parts. The first part would be, is the spiritual purpose transcendental to astrological circumstances? No, it's not. The spiritual goal or spiritual things are transcendental to karmas and therefore transcendental to astrology, but the spiritual quest is not. Do you know why? Your friend's house is certainly transcendental to your car, isn't it? Your friend's house is not contained by your car, or your friend's house is not built by your car or maintained by your car. Yet your car is important to getting you to your friend's house. Hence, your car is not irrelevant to your participation in your friend's house. You understand that? The goal may be transcendental, but the process of achieving the goal may not be. So, we will use our body and mind for our ultimate purpose, won't we? And even if the ultimate purpose is transcendental, the body and mind which we use to achieve that purpose is a product of karmas. And just like you need to know about your car if you're going to drive it, you need to know about your body and mind if you're going to use it effectively. So astrology is actually not irrelevant even to sadhana and spiritual pursuit. It's not essential to it, but it's not irrelevant to it. If you happen to be good at it, or if you happen to like it, you can utilize it effectively for bettering your sadhana. Now, the other part of the question is, do we have secondary purpose, etc.? Yes, you have many, not just secondary, but we have many, many, many levels of purposes. So, for example, basically you can ascertain the different levels of purposes or dharma based on how long you are responsible for them. So there are some things for which there are some things that are my eternal duties. They will never change in any lifetime. There are other things which I've been pursuing over many lifetimes. But eventually I'll change that, or that may change. There are other things which I pursue for my entire life. So here we already see 3 levels before we've even gotten to the life purpose. Then there are things that I pursue for large segments of my life. Like perhaps raising children, or developing a career. And then there are things which I produce for short segments, which I are my responsibility for short segments of my life. Being the tenant in a apartment or something like that. Owning a house for some years. And then there are some things that I do for a year or two. There are some things that I do for a month. There are some things that I do for a few hours. So all those are the different levels of our responsibilities. Obviously, the ones which last longer are more important than the ones which last shorter. So you have many, many different purposes, many, many different levels of dharma. And now the final part of the question is, where can you see that in the birth chart, all these different levels? It's not really that you see it in a particular place. It's that you see it in the prominence of the indication. When you see something that every single thing in the chart agrees with in some way or another, that is something which is trans-lifetime. That's a trans-lifetime responsibility. When you see something that much of the chart agrees with, that's something that will dominate throughout their entire life. And when you see something in the chart that's also sort of interesting, that means it's something that will pop up in their life from time to time and for some periods. And when you see all the other stuff, then that's all the other stuff that they get into for a while, or they're responsible for a while. So I hope that's clear. Now we can move on to the next question. Another 9 thumbs question. This one is from Luisa Ribeiro. Or is it Ribeiro? I don't know how to pronounce it. Luisa Ribeiro. Can good planets in moksha houses have positive effects on a person's life? If so, what? So moksha houses. So I think first we should just be clear. If you're using the word moksha house when you really meant to use a different word. Moksha houses 4, 8, and 12. Most people don't have a question of whether or not a benefic in 4 is good. It's pretty obvious that a benefic in 4 is good. So maybe you meant to say dustans, bad houses, which is 6, 8, and 12. Instead of 4, it's 6. So then the question is basically, good planets in bad houses. Is that good? Generally, it's good to have good planets in good houses. And bad planets in bad houses is also good. And by bad, we don't mean bad, like evil. By bad, we mean just tough. But so what she's asking is it possible that there could be a good effect from a good planet in a tough house, a soft planet in a hard house, a gentle planet in a rough house? These are all synonyms that mean the same thing. So the answer is planets have good effects in any house. This is the answer from Paul Deepak. I should have gotten the direct quote for you because it's nice. But Paul Deepak directly says any planet in any house can have a good effect if it's under the right circumstances. Planets have good effects in any houses when their dignity is high and when their lordship is conducive to that house. Excuse me. Someone will soon ask a question about a Viparreeta rajayoga, which is a good example of this. So just remember that mantra. Planets can have good effects in any house if their dignity is high and their lordship is conducive to that house. And conversely, any planet can have a bad effect in any house if its dignity is low and its lordship is not conducive to that house. All right? What is the effect of a good planet in the bad house? It's too various. There's a ginormous spectrum of possible effects. The effects depend upon the circumstance. So that's Louisa's question. Now D has another question. The elusive single character person D also asked, does a planet in the 7th house show our partners or our attitudes towards them? For example, does the moon in the 7th indicate that we have beautiful partners or that we are emotional in relationships? So D gave this thing of the 7th house, but it could be anything. Really what D is asking is, when a planet is in a house and you interpret that, are you interpreting objectively what I get from that house or subjectively how I feel about that house? You understand the question? It's quite a good question. I remember investigating this question myself or thinking about it myself. The answer is very simple. There is no difference. Of course, there's a difference, but there's no significant difference. Because the way that you feel about something is a result of what the thing is, and also is the cause of what the thing is. It's not unrelated. It's completely interrelated. The way that I feel about my partner will be because of what the partner is, and also the way that I feel about them will make them that thing to me, in my perception. So the chart shows your perception of reality. So there's no difference between the reality of it and your perception of it. Okay? Next. Parivartana. Now we're getting up to these big... These questions have 11 thumbs. Chinmay Bhagwat asked, does a Parivartana yoga between a Dushtan and a Kendra strengthen both the houses or weaken them? And if multiple planets are involved... Whoa, no. Okay, good. And if multiple planets are involved, how does it affect the planets? Okay, so do you know what a Parivartan, Dushtan, and Kendra are? So Parivartan is a house exchange. So if there's a house exchange between a Dushtan and a Kendra, so what's a Dushtana? Dushtana is a difficult house. 6, 8, or 12. And so does a house exchange between a difficult house and a Kendra. What's a Kendra? It's a central house. 1, 4, 7, or 10. So the question is, if there's a Parivartana yoga between a bad house and an important house, between 6, 8, and 12, and 1, 4, 7, and 10, then how do you interpret that? Does that strengthen both the houses? Or does it weaken both the houses? Or what? Then another question about Parivartana yogas comes next. But let's just handle this one first. So for this one, let me remind you. This answer is just direct from Paladipika 632. Anyonyam bhavanatayor vihagayor lagnadi ripantakam bhavadhishwarayo kramena katita shashtashti yoga janai trishadainyam udirinang vyayarupuchidrantinatotitas Tashtau Shoyapati Kala Nigadita Shesha Mahakya Sprata. So he just explains how you interpret the house exchange yogas. If it's a Dusthana and any house, he calls it unfortunate Dainya. So 6, 8, and 12. If 6, 8, and 12 is a part of any house exchange, he calls it Dainya, unfortunate. Then he says if 3, on the other hand, house 3 is involved in the house exchange, then he calls it Kala, which means temperamental. And then he says anything else besides those 4 is Maha, great. So actually what happens is the Dushtana plus any other house benefits the Dushtana, but harms the other house. Because, like, just think, if you have one container of yucky stuff and one container of clean stuff, if you mix them, you've improved the yucky container and you've worsened the clean container. So, however, this is like a framework. It's like saying 75%. It's like an answer for the sake of having an answer so that you can proceed with your thought process. But really, what you really have to do to look at the quality of a Parivartana yoga is to see the quality of the planets involved. Especially, how is the dignity of the planets involved, or are there any special circumstances? Like the Parivartana is between these houses that are very conducive or non-conducive. Or the planets are friends or enemies, etc. There's many, many other things that you really want to look at. Then the other part of the question was, what about the other planets that are in the house that's involved in a Parivartana yoga? So say, for example, if you have a Parivartana yoga between your 5th and 11th house, and you also have other planets in the 11th house, how does that affect the other planets in the 11th house? It just kind of benefits them. In this particular case, 5 and 11 is a Maha yoga for sure. It's got a good starting point. So it's probably going to just benefit the planets. It puts them in a more prosperous environment. And honestly, I want to stress this. As long as you think that you have to ask every single question to a knowledgeable astrologer, then you haven't really understood that astrology is very simple. Astrology is very simple and intuitive and rational, and all that we have to do is clear out the cobwebs in your brain, clean out the muck, organize your brain, get clear about what the basic symbols of the planets, houses, and signs are, and if nakshatras, if you'll use them, and then just get used to how to use your brain, because it's all very common sense. It's just basic natural symbolism. So if somebody's answer doesn't make common sense, then it's probably not a good answer if they're explaining something about how astrology works. Okay, the next question, this is one of the ones that didn't have that many thumbs up, but that's because it was asked like yesterday compared to last week. But it still got like 3 or 4 thumbs up or something, so it's obviously something that people would be interested. So Dr. Gaurav Singhal 2 asks, is Viparreeta Rajayoga as strong as the standard Rajayoga? So do other people know what Viparreeta Rajayoga is? Viparreeta Rajayoga is a condition where the 6th lord, where the lord of one Dustan goes to another Dustan. The lord of one tough house goes to another tough house. And that's considered a good thing. So here's an example of a planet in a Dustan that does a good thing. That was related to somebody's previous question. But this was Louisa's. So it's called Rajayoga, but it has nothing to do with Rajayogas. It's not a Rajayoga in any way. A Rajayoga is a combination between a Kendra. I mean, a Rajayoga is just a name for something. The names of the yogas are just intended to give the interpretation of the yoga in a very small nutshell, just like the names of the signs are. And just like the symbols of what those names mean. The lion, the crab. These names are just intended to give you the symbolism in a word. Same way the names of the yogas are just meant to tell you what the effect is. They almost never are about the technical cause or ingredients of the yoga. So just because this is called a Rajayoga doesn't mean it has anything to do astrologically with the other Rajayogas, the common Rajayogas, which are Kendra Kona Rajayogas. The combinations of trines and angles. So it's mixing apples and oranges to ask, is this as strong as a regular rajayoga? It's not a rajayoga. It just has a similar effect of giving you raja, giving you power. It gives you power in a different way. Is it as strong as is this yoga as strong as a standard Raj yoga? Depends. How well is this yoga? What is your evaluation? You have to learn how to evaluate things in the first place. If you have a standard Raj yoga that's barely formed by planets that are in awful dignity, then that's not very great yoga anyway. And of course, and if you compare that with the Viparreeta yoga that's perfectly formed by a planet that's in great dignity with very helpful aspects on it, then of course that's much stronger than that weak Raj yoga. But other way around, you might have a Viparreeta Raj yoga formed by a planet that's hardly in that house and in bad dignity in that house, versus a Raj yoga that's perfectly formed by 9 and 10 out of all the Kendras and Konas. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Next, we have this question, which was 15 thumbs up. So people certainly want to know about this. This is from Shweta Malakar. Is there any yoga indicating sexual harassment as a child? Is there yoga, or how would you notice this? How would you foresee this in a chart? And if we see it, should we inform parents about it? So there's two parts of the question. Let me just answer the second part of the question first. If you see something in a chart, should you tell people about it? Your duty as a chart reader is to help people, is it not? If your duty is to collect money and go buy a Porsche or a new home, then do whatever the hell you want and you'll suffer later. But if your duty is to be a good person and help other people, then that's your job. So you will, whether or not you have to you have to tell the person, you have to use your intelligence to figure out how and who and what is the best way to protect and help and inform the people about these circumstances. But no, you may not ignore something like this. You're not allowed to do that. It doesn't mean that you have to blurt it out, but you are now responsible for it. This is an important thing in the Mahabharata. It's one of the important moral lessons that the Mahabharata teaches, how implicated everybody was in the guilt of what happened to Draupadi in the dice game. All of those people were implicated. That's why they all died in the Mahabharata war. All those kings. Why? Because they didn't speak up to protect her, to say anything in her favor, to even try to answer her question. So it just goes to illustrate that if you put yourself in a position that you are going to read somebody's chart, then now it's your responsibility to inform them about what's in that chart. But it doesn't mean that you have to blankly tell them every single thing that you see. You have to use your intelligence to figure out who is the right person to tell about this, when should I tell them, how should I tell them, what exactly should I say. Okay, now let's go and look at the first part of the question. Is there what is a configuration that would indicate sexual harassment as a child? It's basic, again. Astrology is basic. If you think that you have to ask some specific question about a specific thing, then actually you don't understand something very important about astrology, that it's basic. You don't need to ask specific questions because the answers to specific questions are just the basics in a specific context. So ask your questions more about basics. So how would you see something like this very unfortunate situation of sexual harassment as a child? You'll just see, it's very simple. What are the indicators of violence? What are the indicators of sexuality? Combine those and then you get sexual violence. And then, how would you tell the difference between it happening to a child or happening to adults? Well, just pull out your toolkit for how you would know anything about timing. And there's various tools to know about timing, whether something happens early in life, middle of life, late of life. Right? One of the most popular ones is dasha. So basically, if you're seeing a planet or a group of planets indicating an unusually violent or distressful sexual experience, and the timing of those planets, maybe by dasha, or it can be by some very big transit, or something else, like maybe it's to a lord of the first house, which is a bala, which is young age, or maybe it's to the moon, which is related with childhood, or Mercury, which is young. Or if the planet that's involved in that symbol that you're reading as sexual aggression, if that dasha happens at a young age, then you'll see it. So I typically have in my database, a couple of people that come up a lot in the videos that I do and so forth, like Marilyn Monroe, Anais Nin, and Candy Bar, for example. These are people who suffered sexual abuse in childhood. So you could look at any of those for examples. Let me just throw this one on the screen. For Candy Bar, just to show you what I'm talking about. So this will also relate to another question. Look at her 8th house. Isn't that simple? This is simple. Astrology, sexuality, you should look at the 8th house. It has Rahu in it. Where is Rahu in it? Is it anywhere in it? It's at 22 degrees in it. What's important about 22 degrees? Well, the ascendant is 21 degrees. This is going to be somebody else's question soon. We'll talk about this specifically. But it's very important to be at that degree. It's very strong in that 8th house. And it's aspected by Mars. How strong? It's by Mars's 4th aspect. What's special about Mars's 4th aspect? That other question that we had? What's special about it is that it's 100% clear. It's 100% powerful. So how close is it to 4th house? How close is it to 90 degrees? It's very damn close. Mars is at 18 degrees and Rahu is at 22 degrees. So it's a very strong aspect from Mars. From where? The 5th house, children. From what sign? Libra, sensuality. So there's a very strong aspect from Mars in a sensual position related to children onto her Rahu in the 8th house. Meanwhile, the supporting things are the mother and the father aren't doing their job, or they're weakened or something, because Moon has a very strong aspect from Saturn, and Sun is very strongly conjoined by Ketu. And guess what? The Sun Dasha occurs in her childhood. So this is an example of how you do something like that. Now, let's continue. So now, this question had 15 people voted for it to be addressed. Now, here's another one that was asked very late, but still had people vote for it. And I think it's very significant. Anupam Garg asked really several questions about the divisional charts, the Amsha charts, the Varga charts. So I broke it down into 3. I edited it down into 3 questions. I think these are really good questions. Let's take a look at them. His first question is, what are the important divisional charts? And what does each one signify? Well, again, the Paladipika answers this. Let me show you. Paladipika, this is chapter 3, text 1 and 2. Paladipika said there's Shad, Sapt, and Dash Vargas that are important. So it's saying there's an infinite number of ways you could divide a sign, but there's 10 ways of doing it that are important. Divide it as a whole, divide it in half, that's 2, divide it into thirds, divide into sevenths, divide into ninths, divide into tenths, 12ths, 16ths, 30ths, and 60ths. So those are called the 10 important divisional charts. But he says they're not all equally important. He says that 1 and 9 are very, very important. The Navamsha is very, very important. He says it's equally important as the first. Then he says the ones that are very not that important is 10, 16, and 60, and then the rest of them are medium. So if you take 3 out, then you take out the 3 weakest, then you take out 10, 16, and 60. Now his 60 is not the regular 60. The Paladibiga 60 is a very unique or interesting 60. D60. It's not by sign, it's by benefic or malefic. It just splits the degrees into benefic and malefic segments. So he's saying, even more important than the Dashvarga, there's these 7. 1, 2, 3, 7, 9, 12, and 30. And then he says even 7 is a little bit weaker out of those ones. So the 6 that are extremely important is 1, 2, 3, 9, 12, and 30. 30, what's that? That's per degree, but you're not going to have 30 segments. This is known as bounds or bhangs. This is popular all throughout the world to do this system. So that's the first part of his question, was which ones are important. And then he wanted to know the topics of them, right? What does each one signify? So here's what they signify. So each one has like a focus to it. Obviously the whole chart, the real chart, the D1, is the main chart that you read. Then the rest of them have like some subtopic to them that they focus on. 2 is difficult to explain. It's about gender alignment. So it's about how well the masculine energy, how masculine are the masculine energies and how feminine are the feminine energies. And therefore, how well aligned are the elements of this person's motivations and executions of things. How kind of clear and simple, or versus how much does it oscillate back and forth and not really proceed on the same foot each time. So the second division, cutting signs in half, it shows you a lot about how strong a person is. Because of this. Like when the gender alignments of things line up favorably, then there's strength and clarity to the person. When the gender alignments mismatch, then the person we wouldn't say they're weak, but they're like coffee that's been stirred. So that's what the second divisional is about. It's a unique one. It's not by zodiac sign. The third divisional is about strength. How strong are you and how do you fight? How do you compete? How do you struggle? How do you strive? How's your lust? How's your ambition? The seventh is about your unions, like the seventh. So these are just like the houses, really. 2 is really about your strength. 3 is like your health strength and how solid you are, right? That's really what the second division is about. 3 is like your strength, your muscle strength, and your passion. It's the same thing as D3. 7 is about marriage, production of children, sex. That's what D7 is about. 9 is what's the 9th house about? That's what the D9 is about. It's about your morality and the dharma, your underlying nature. 10, what's the 10th house about? That's what the D10 is about, career. But it's not a very important chart. What does it mean it's not a very important chart? I thought career is very important. Yes, but this chart is not very strong. The conditions in this chart are not very important compared to the conditions in the 9th. I'll explain to you how to use them because that's the second part of his question. The 12th is for parents, which also means like your birth conditions and the ways you were raised. But it's the 12th, so what does it have to do with the 12th house? It can also mean it has to do with the things that you're going to lose, because the parents almost always die before us. Then you get to these numbers that are beyond 12. Even 12, I'm not really so sure how it's relating to parents, but 16 is like the 4th house. It's about your possessions, your property, your comforts. 30 is, don't think of it as 30, think of it as 5. And think of the key thing about the 30th divisional is that it's uneven. It's the only division that's not equal. The divisions are all weird sizes. And so this is about like the way that you stumble or trip or fall or don't go smooth. So D30 is about the challenges. And then the 60th division, the way that he constructs it in Paladipika is simply like another layer of dignity, whether the planet is really malefic or benefically inclined. But there is another way of doing D60, which is by sign. And there are other opinions about that, like Parashara, Horashastra opinion of D60, as far as I remember, is that it's very important. And Parashara Horashastra's opinion on the calculation of D60 is to do it as signs. So these are two different techniques, really. Okay, so that answers the first part, the divisionals. What are the important divisional charts, and what does each one signify? Then Anupam G, he says, does the interpretation of the first house of divisional chart change as per the divisional chart, or is it still the same as the D1? So what he's asking is, in the main chart, the first house represents, let's say, the self, and the body, the physical person, and the tangible reality. What about the first house of the Navamsha? Does it also represent the self? What about the fifth house of the Saptamsha? Does it also represent the self? It represents the self in the context of that Amsha. Why think about only the first? Think about, let's say, the ninth. The ninth house of the D7 represents the morality or the underlying character, the true permanent, the real true motivations of your sex life and your marriages and your partnerships. That's the ninth house of the seventh division. Similarly, the first house of the seventh division would be the actual character of your sex life, your marriage life, your partnerships. You understand? And his third question about divisionals, under what context should what divisional charts be studied? Thus, how best to drill down into the divisionals? I didn't edit this one so well. It was the last one I think I edited. Under what context should what divisional chart be studied? So it is, again, it's just simple. It follows the same principles as everything else. Astrology is a language. It's a language where the words are planets and signs and symbols. It's like a language of symbols. And so reading, that's why we say reading a chart. Reading astrology follows the same process as reading any other language. You establish the meaning of a word based very much upon what other words it's next to. And that's the whole process of reading the chart. So as you're trying, whatever word in the chart, whatever symbol your attention focuses on for whatever reason, you must have your reasons why you would want to know. Maybe you want to know about the person's career. So then you focus on something like the sun, the 10th house or something. That's how you begin. Then to figure out the sun, you look at its context. Where is it? What's surrounding it? What words are surrounding this one word? In that process, one of your questions will be, what subdivisions is it in? So you always use the main chart as the main thing that you study. When you think, I want to help this person with their career, you don't skip the main chart and go look at the Dashamsha, the D10. If you do that, then you get official smack from Victor Kara's astrology. No one would do that. Nobody would do that, right? You would go to the D1. You go to the main chart. And there you look at things in the main chart. But as you're figuring out the things in the main chart, you'll have questions. I think this main chart means this, but I think it's just like a detective. I think it means this. Well, I need more evidence to be sure. Where can I go for evidence? One of the places you go then is to the D10. Am I seeing things in this D10 confirming what I see in the D1 or not? If I'm seeing things confirming what I see in the D1, then I found the answer. But if I'm not, then I need to go back to D1 and look at it again. To look at other options, because something has to match with what's in D10. Okay, so one, and the thing that you'll do is also, just like you don't go straight to D10, you don't even go to something like D10 right away. You don't even go to amshas right away. Yeah? First you read everything you can read about the thing as it is in the main chart. Then look at it from the moon. Then look at it from the amshas. But always go to the navamsha first. Because like he explained, the importance of the navamsha is very high. You see? The importance of the navamsha is very high. Therefore, we'll always go to the navamsha first. So if in a situation like for reading a career, you look at the 10th house, the 10th lord, the sun, etc., the different things in the main chart, and then when you feel that it's time for you to call in these other witnesses to question them about the person's career, you've looked at the 10th from the moon, etc., then you want to start to look in the divisionals to make sure, to get confidence in what you've interpreted, or to lose confidence in something that you've misinterpreted. Then the first place you go is navamsha, no matter what your topic is. You go navamsha, and then after that you go to this one that's specific to that topic. So I hope that clarifies. Now, the next question. This one, we have what? We have 5 questions left. And now we're getting up to some very popular questions. These are like 20 thumbs up or more. This is about whole sign cusps from Saraswati. If a planet is at the exact degree as the ascendant but in a different house, what effect does it have on the ascendant? So with this one, this is what we were talking about here with Candy Bar and her Rahu at 22 degrees while her ascendant is at 21. So if a planet is at the exact degree as the ascendant, but in a different house, what effect does it have on the ascendant? Well, your question is about the ascendant, but let me explain something else first. The main thing that will happen is that this planet will have a huge effect on that house, just like Candy Bar's Rahu has a huge effect on her 8th house. Because that degree, the degree of the ascendant, determines the cusp. What the cusp means is the defining point. In a whole sign house system, the defining point is not at the edge. It's anywhere within the sign. So what the cusp is saying is this is really the thing that makes the 8th house the 8th house. This is really the point that makes the 7th house the 7th house. It's this degree being in this sign. So if something is at that degree, then it's really in that house. Now, so that's the real important thing, that when you see a planet that's very close to the ascendant's degree, even if it's not in the first house, it's very important for that house. Now, your exact question, though, is what effect does it have on the ascendant? It doesn't necessarily have an effect on the ascendant. It has an effect on the house that it's occupying. But if you think about how aspects work, if something lines up with the degree of the ascendant, then it's very likely that its aspect is also lined up with the ascendant, or it becomes more likely that its aspect is lined up with the ascendant. For inner planets, this only happens with the 7th, or maybe the 10th, or the 6th. If the planet is in the 7th, 10th, or 6th, you can get a strong aspect to the ascendant. But for the outer planets, like Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, this can very strongly come into play. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. Let's look at the next one now. This one was very, very popular. A very simple question, this next one. From Ned Ludd, 1811. This is a very old person who was born in 1811. How does debilitated Venus in Virgo express itself differently in a male or female chart? This is a very interesting, simple question that a lot of people liked. So my answer here is, it's more important that you understand the effects of a debilitated Venus rather than, because if you don't understand the effects of the debilitated Venus, how will you understand how it's different in a male or a female chart? Now, you can't go to the bookshelf and pull out the book about debilitated Venus and know what a debilitated Venus signifies. The book from the bookshelf about the debilitated Venus is your food for thought, and without that food for thought, you have no real hope of understanding a debilitated Venus, but it's not that you can just copy and paste straight out of that book to understand what a debilitated Venus means, because no two debilitated Venuses are the same. So the effect of a debilitated Venus is really the real question. It's not hard to tell how it will differentiate between a male and a female chart. That's the easy part. The hard part is interpreting what's the effect of the debilitated Venus. It really depends usually upon things like what yoga is a Venus in. Maybe this debilitated Venus is in a great rajayoga or a niche bhang yoga, right? Maybe it's in a niche bhang rag yoga, something which is supposed to turn its debilitation around. You also want to think about the Vargas of that Venus. Maybe this Venus is Vargotam. Maybe this Venus is in its own signs within the debility in like 7 of the 10 amshas. You have to think about stuff like that. Maybe it's in Virgo all the way through and it's debilitated all the way through to the core. You have to think about the conjunctions that it has, etc., etc., etc. It's really the real effort here is to determine what the effects are of this debilitated Venus. The only thing about the question of how would it apply differently for a male versus a female, whatever the effects are, is very simple. The simple principle is just that women and men relate with Venus differently, where women basically are Venus. The female self-concept and self-identity is this stuff that Venus represents. That's me. That's what I do. That's what I am. Whereas the male nature, the male person may or may not have gender conformity, but the male nature is to identify that Venus is not me. Venus is the thing I need. Venus is the thing I want. So, therefore, the effect of the debilitated Venus is therefore different to a male or a female. The debilitated Venus in the female's chart affects the way the female feels about herself. Whereas the effect of the debilitated Venus in the male chart affects the way the male feels, the way that the male is able to get what they want in life. Okay, Ned. Now we come back to this very popular question. Remember, we had Tatev's question about spirituality and the life purpose. And I mentioned that there's quite a few questions on basically the same topic. So now let's get to those. We have 3. We can count Tatev's and that'll be 4. So Michelle Mistelski asks, how can we use our chart to help us make progress on the spiritual path? Hermes asks, how does Jyotish look at achieving enlightenment? Can the eye of the Vedas help us achieve it? And then Hermes' pal Plato asks, in a chart, what indicates the potential to very actively and seriously pursue spiritual liberation? Can you give 3 examples? So you can see there's quite a lot of interest in this. How can we use our chart to help us make progress on the spiritual path? So as I mentioned to Tatev, we use our mind and our body and etc. everything. We use everything about this incarnation for our spiritual progress, right? We use it for our sadhana. We use it for our spiritual practice. For your meditation, what do you meditate with? Your uncle? You meditate with your uncle's mind? You meditate with your mind. You're going to do puja. What do you do it with? You do it with your hands. You do it with your hands. You go on pilgrimage with what? Your feet. So your body and your mind and your heart is the instrument that you use for your spiritual progress. Since some people may argue, and I often say, astrology doesn't tell you anything about spiritual things. It tells you about material things. But because you use material things for spiritual ends, it is not irrelevant to spiritual things. So just like I explained before, like you drive your car to your friend's house. Your friend's house is not your car. And your car does not describe your friend's house. But if you don't know how to drive, then you won't it'll be difficult to get to your friend's house. The better you understand your car, the more you can be sure that you'll get to your friend's house safely. Similarly, the better that we understand our mind, our body, our habits, our inclinations, our reflexes, our flaws, our assets, our strengths, the better we understand that, the better we can use the tool. When you get a tool that you've not seen before, do you not read the manual? The people that don't read the manual, they're kind of silly. The people that get it done right are the people that read the manual very carefully. So what is astrology basically is like saying, this is your body. It's like this. This is your mind. This is how you think. This is how you feel. This is why these are your tendencies. This is what you're programmed to do. This is your nature. Know that this is what you are using in a spiritual path. So can you identify the things that are conducive to spiritual practice, the things that are not conducive, the things therefore you have to modify for, take into account, etc., the things you can expect to be able to do and not be able to do? You can understand that. So how can we use our chart to help us make progress on the spiritual path? Because your chart explains your body and your mind, and if you intend to use your body and your mind to go and become a porn star, then astrology will help you become a porn star. If you intend to use your body and your mind to help you become a scientist, then astrology will help you become a scientist. If you intend to use your body and your mind to get liberation and moksha and enlightenment and whatever, then astrology will help you do that. Then for Plato specifically said, can you give us 3 examples of things that indicate a person that's very spiritual? It's not 3 things. It's very simple. It's this. Everybody knows it. Anybody on this, I bet you, 95% of the people watching the stream can answer you already. K2, 12th house, 8th house, spas. Yeah, maybe some other stuff. But there's very, very simple things that have to do with spirituality. It's not about the 3 things. It's about if you're getting 3 in a row or not. It's like when you go bowling. You can get 3 strikes. Or if you get 3 strikes in a row, it's quite different. If you get 3 strikes in a row in bowling, you get 30 points in one frame. If you get 3 strikes spread out with 2 gutters after each, you get 10 points per frame. It's like that in anything. In astrology, it's like that. It's what indicates that a person is very, very spiritually inclined isn't that they have 3 things. It's that the things in their chart all line up in a row, pointing at those spiritual things. I hope that's clear. Now, to the final two questions. You know what? I'm going to change the order of these two. Even though this one at 25, this was the king of the questions. 25 thumbs up from the son of Apollon. A lot of Greeks. We had Hermes, Plato, and Apollo. What if a planet is debilitated but it has directional strength? For example, Saturn in Aries in the 7th house. So this really, I guess it's been too many years since I covered this. I used to talk about this all the time. In evaluation of a planet, it hasn't been too many years. It's the nature of YouTube. Because Paul Deepica explains this in the early chapters. The nature of a planet is that there's several things about it that you need to understand. One thing is its dignity, and another thing is its strength. Why people mix up the strength and dignity? Because they have sloppy minds. And because it's tempting to mix up the dignity and strength because they influence each other. They do influence each other. Having low dignity makes it more difficult to get very strong because you don't feel very motivated. However, strength of a planet and the dignity of the planet are two separate considerations and two separate calculations. The things that make a planet strong are not the same as the thing that makes a planet dignified. Again, all you have to do is be simple. Tell yourself that astrology makes sense. It's not hocus pocus. If it's hocus pocus, then for the rest of your life you have to ask the witches and the wizards what it means. But it's not hocus pocus. It's rational and it makes sense. It makes sense. What does dignity mean? Dignity means your behavior. The quality of your behavior. A dignified person doesn't stoop to low things. They don't hurt other people just because they can. In fact, they act in a noble way. They feel they're charitable, they're philanthropic, etc. when they're dignified. They're generous. Whereas the people that are debased, they're very rough. They harm other people because they're needy. This is what dignity means. So the dignity of a planet shows you its mood per chart. Not its natural mood, but its mood per chart. A planet that's naturally very dignified, like Jupiter or Venus, can excel to the higher end of the spectrum of dignity. And a planet that's very naturally undignified, like Saturn, can excel to the low end of the dignity. So this is like a planet's intentions are communicated when we describe its dignity. But strength, it comes from things like Dikbal, or what direction is it in? Does it like to be in the west? Does it like to be in the east? What time of year is it? Does this planet like this time of year or not? What time of day is it? Does this planet like that time of day or not? Those are the things that give them strength. How full is it? Like what's its phase? How far is it from the sun? So you can break it down into a 4-pole system. Think of it as a 4-pole system. Place the two extremes of the dignity spectrum on the left and the two extremes of the strength spectrum on the right, and make a square. So you have very dignified, very undignified, very strong, very weak. And the planet can fall anywhere on that grid in between those 4 points. So the way to explain the 4 points, imagine a person that is very generous towards you. Then that planet, that's similar to a planet that's towards this side of the spectrum. I'm sorry, the dignity is towards this upper corner here. The dignity is very high. But we don't know where they are left and right, because we just know where they are in the dignity spectrum. This person is very generous towards you. So they're up high on the square. But are they weak? Put it as put it as an XY axis. Are they weak or are they strong? Then you can place them in a position this way or not. So just to give you the 4 archetypes, somebody, if a planet is strong, then it really matters whether they hate you or love you, which doesn't mean hate, which means whether they're rough towards you or whether they're gentle towards you. Just like if a person wants to slap you, right? And they're very strong and powerful, you're in trouble. You're going to get slapped hard because this person can do what they want because they're very powerful. Similarly, if a person wants to give you a new car, give you a new house, give you $1 million, and they're very powerful and strong, then you're in great luck because they can do what they want. So strong planets are very important, and their dignity is very important. Well, weak planets, whatever their dignity is, becomes very less consequential. Because it's like this person wants to give you $1 million, but they don't even have $1 million. They don't even have $50. So it's nice. They have nice intention towards you. It helps you in your life. It encourages you. It makes you feel good. But you can't get $1 million from this person. Similarly, that person wants to slap you and put you in jail because of the crimes that because of the wrongs that you did to them in their opinion. But they're weak. Okay, that makes you feel bad that somebody hates you, etc. But you don't actually wind up in prison. So in your particular example, if Saturn is in Aries, then it's in very low dignity. And if it's in the 7th house, then it's in very high strength. This is completely forgetting all the rest of the things in astrology that we must not forget. But just to answer your question, simple for the sake of pedagogy, for the sake of teaching, this hypothetical example is this Saturn will wreck your partnerships. The Saturn in Aries in the 7th house will wreck your partnerships. Why? Because it's a miserable dignity in high strength. But when you really have Saturn in Aries in the 7th house in tropical and whole sign system, don't say but or oh no. It matters. The Digbal is not the only thing that makes Saturn weak or strong. And Saturn, just like I talked about Venus, debilitated Venus, there's a lot of real questions that you have to ask about debilitated any planet. Okay? Final question. This is from the artist formerly known as Samurai Mama. Is there any description of the subconscious or unconscious mind in Vedic philosophy? As a planetary archetype, would it be represented by the moon or by Ketu? So two parts of the question. Is there a subconscious or unconscious mind in Vedic philosophy? Kapila Dev, Sankhya, Canto 3, Bhagavatam answers this question. There certainly is, and it's called Chitta. The Chitta is really this what modern psychology talks about subconscious, unconscious mind. And they're talking about the Chitta. The Chitta mind is really the storage facility of the mind. And also it's this unconscious part of the mind which is simply the receptor for the spiritual energy of consciousness. Consciousness plugs into the body through this thing called Chitta, which is like this deep part of the mind that doesn't really do anything, just receives the consciousness. So this is one way that that subconscious is described in Vedic philosophy. It's also described by other schools of thought as aprarabdha. The aprarabdha karma is the subconscious. It means the things that you don't know about you. Aprarabdha. These are things about you, but you don't know that they're there. You wouldn't see them on the surface. So in this school of thought of the karma mimamsa, the karma produces effects, fruit. Karma produces fruits first in the subconscious or unmanifest form. And then by sitting in the subconscious mind, in that unmanifest aparabdha form, it influences the activities without you really knowing it, without you knowing explicitly. And so thus it becomes parabdha, or it becomes manifest by causing certain activities. So it's the same as the way we think with modern psychology, how the subconscious influences the behavior, and then that behavior causes conditions. So just to give you, I have some more information in my notes. Indriya goes to buddhi, buddhi goes to manas, manas goes to chitta. This is the basic role of chitta. Indriya is the senses. You get sensual input, and then it goes to buddhi, which is we call intellect. The intellect sorts out the inputs and makes sense of them, identifies them, and then it presents them to manas, which we would call in psychology mind. It's the interpreter of the experiences. And then the mind and the buddhi store the things, the experiences, in chitta. So, for example, where you have like your trauma stored, all that subconscious stuff that's in chitta. Or all of your positive samskars, that's in the chitta. That's all subconscious mind. Really, the interesting thing here is buddhi and chitta are evolutes of manas. Intellect and subconsciousness are evolutes of mind. They're like specialized functions of the mind. Now, the second part of your question is, as a planetary archetype, would it be represented by the moon or by Ketu? This subconsciousness, where would you see it in a chart? Well, it's an evolute of the mind, right? So therefore, it should have something to do with the moon. But there is not really a need. As far as I think right now, the chart doesn't show anything about aprarabdha karma. The chart shows the prarabdha karma. A chart does not really have the capacity to show what's in the aprarabdha. We don't know what's in the aprarabdha. I guess a very incredibly good astrologer could infer the aprarabdha from the prarabdha, or an incredibly good thinker, like a god. So it's possible to determine the subconscious from the chart, but the chart is really more about the effects that are visibly happening in this lifetime. So, furthermore, the chitta or the subconscious doesn't have an effect directly. That's why it's subconscious. If it had a direct effect, then we would know that it's there. We would consciously know that it's there. So it wouldn't be called subconscious then. So you get that? So there's no need to have a separate symbol for chitta. It's just the moon will, and I taught this in Planets 101. And the moon, in Sankhya, the moon is the manas and the chitta. The moon will signify the chitta basically because the chitta operates in the real world by its effect on the mind. So that's why you can infer the chitta or the subconscious from the moon. All right. That was very fun. How much time did that take? That took a good chunk of time, but not too terribly long. Was that enjoyable? Thank you, Jenny. We're out of time. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, I'm not going to look at all, but thank you very much. So I'll do this again sometime. You can, what you want to do is you'll watch my comments, like what is it called? The community tab. I'll post the thing in the community tab saying ask your questions here and vote on the questions. And then you can ask your questions in the comments on that thing. And then people will vote on them. And the ones with the most thumbs up will be the ones that I prepare to answer. Thanks, everybody.